Have you ever wondered how to heal and integrate an aspect of yourself that you are uncomfortable with? Maybe you have an inner critic that is always criticizing the choices that you make. Maybe you have a part that likes to drink or engage in substance use that leads to days where you don't feel well. Maybe you have a part of yourself that thinks that dying would solve the problem so that you don't experience more suffering. Or maybe you have a part of yourself that is ashamed of who you are and you feel insecure. In this video, I will share a case study of a client that I was working with who was struggling with suicidal thoughts, self-harm behavior, as well as shame and guilt over who they were. And they were struggling with how to identify and accept themselves due to experiences they had in childhood inside their Christian belief system. I will explore how I used a combination of internal family systems theory, EMDR, and Reiki, which is a form of energy healing, to help them to connect to something deep within their unconscious that led to a mystical experience that was very different from what they had been taught that mystical experiences are from their Christian belief system. This led to them having a deep healing and integration, led to a decrease of actually a stopping of symptoms, and led them then to engage in the world in a different way that was more helpful to themselves and led them to want to help others. I call this process of healing and integration the hero's journey. So I had been working with this client for a couple years, and early in our work, we were helping them just learn how to be with the aspects of themselves that were causing distress. So they were experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of discomfort with who they are. They had a very strong inner critic. As I mentioned, they had suicidal thoughts, and they were engaging in self-harm behavior. And this was all very distressing for them. And I began the process of internal family systems work, which I describe parts work in a previous video. So if you don't know what parts work is, I encourage you to pause this video and go watch my previous videos where I explore what parts work is. But parts work is the process of getting to know yourself on a deeper level. It is the idea that we have an inner compass that is whole and complete and can never be harmed, and we have parts of ourselves that are our sub-personalities that can be harmed, that often have been harmed, and that can lead to behaviors and feelings and thoughts that are distressing. So I engaged in a process of mindfulness, helping my client get to know these parts of themselves. And they began to get to know this part of themselves that was ashamed, that were engaging in suicidal and self-harm. And what they came to understand is they had a teenager part, I believe it was. No, it was a young part that was engaging in self-harm because they had another young part who was 5 who had experienced being told that they were going to go to hell because they identified as non-binary. And as we continued to get to know their system, they recognized that they had parts that were male, parts that were female, and parts that were genderless, that just kind of identified as energy. And as they began to get to know these parts of themselves, they had the clarity of like, oh, well, the reason I'm uncomfortable in my body is different than the majority of my parts. The majority of my parts are one sex, and my body is another sex. And so there's a disharmony between this. They also began to recognize that the self-harming behavior was a protective mechanism because they were so ashamed of who they were or who they felt they were on the inside. And this was all related to teachings that they had experienced in the Christian church that said that it is sinful to be a member of the LGBTQ, plus that it's sinful to want your body to be different than you were born, and this was creating disharmony within themselves. You are entitled to have your belief system. So if you are Christian and do believe that this is a sin, I respect your belief system. But I am going to offer this case study to perhaps challenge some of the thinking and invite you to perhaps read my book and experiment with the exercises in the book to see what you discover when you connect to this unified field that I call the collective divine. So in depth psychology, Carl Jung discovered that we all have what he called the collective unconscious. We all have access to this unified field that holds archetypes, myths, stories that help us make sense of the human experience, and that seem to be mystical in nature and seem to possess different traits of our humanity, such as our compassionate nature or our nature to judge. He deemed, and I deem, the aspect of ourself that is loving and compassionate to be our divine nature, and the aspects of ourselves that judge and punish and oppress to be also divine, but they are in a wounded state that is disconnected to the divine nature of compassion. He called this the shadow and our complexes. So the aspects, the parts of my client's self that were wounded were their shadow, it was their complexes. So I guided them in a practice of Reiki, which is a form of life force energy, healing energy work, to help them to connect to something deep within themselves. I guided them to connect to the air that we all breathe, and I invited them to ask the air questions. I guided them to engage with the air as if it was a person. So in many spiritual traditions, the breath is divine. The breath is the original creator that created all things, and we are all made in the image of God's breath, to use a metaphor. Again, your unique beliefs are yours. In quantum physics, it is the quantum field. When we meditate and we enter a state of meditation, the frontal lobe, which is responsible for compassion, lights up and we feel a sense of love. So it is just a state of connection to compassion. So I helped my client connect to the air. And when they connected to the air, they started crying, and they said that they felt so loved and they felt so accepted and they felt so connected to all things. And I asked them to ask the air questions, and the air said it was what their Christian belief system called God. So I told my client they didn't have to believe that it was God if they were uncomfortable, because they had parts that were afraid of God because of the Christian church telling them that God was going to punish them because they identified as LGBTQ+ and non-binary. So I instead just invited them to ask this energy that was calling itself God questions. So they asked this energy questions, and they asked questions such as, is it wrong for me to identify as LGBTQ+? And the energy said no, that you are encouraged to express your inner divinity however you feel called to express, and you're made in my image, and all things are me. So all of creation is me in the form that it is taken. It's just some are in the form of forgetting and some are in the form of healed. And the energy said, does it cause you or others harm to identify as LGBTQ+ or non-binary? And my client sat with that and was like, does it cause harm? And they could find no evidence that it would cause harm to self or other. And this energy that was calling itself God agreed and said that would not cause harm. Therefore, identify. Express yourself. And they suddenly felt much more at ease. And then they asked, well, am I going to be punished and go to hell if I identify as LGBTQ+, or if I transition to a different type of body than the body I was born with? And the energy again said, no. Is that how you feel called to express yourself? Then express yourself that way. Again, does it cause you or others harm? And then the energy said, there is no such thing as hell. Hell is a state of consciousness that you experience when you are in suffering or you are causing others suffering. And heaven is a state of consciousness where you are at peace inside yourself and you engage in the world in a way that is compassionate towards self and other. And my client found this profound. This completely shifted their belief system. The parts of themselves that had been uncomfortable started to release and feel safe and feel loved. This felt true to my client because they felt at peace and they felt love. And this led to them engaging in accepting themselves as they are. They then began to engage in the world in ways that were more compassionate and collaborative. And they began no longer having suicidal thought, self-harm, feelings of shame or guilt. And so they began to feel at peace inside themselves, and they began to experience the level of consciousness that God called heaven. They then began to engage in their community by helping others that identified as LGBTQ+ find their own path to healing and integration. So why am I sharing this case study? I'm sharing this case study because it doesn't matter to me what you believe. What matters to me is whether or not you can heal and integrate and show up for yourself and the world in a way that leads to less suffering and more peace and ease. And I believe that that is the hero's journey, and that is the process that all human beings are intended to go on. We are intended to integrate all aspects of ourselves that are suffering so that they no longer suffering. We are encouraged to accept our shadow, or the aspect of ourself that causes others and our self-harm, so that we can engage in the world in a way that causes less harm to self and others. Again, I respect your beliefs, and if this doesn't resonate with you, I invite you to continue on your own path. However, if this did resonate with you and you are curious about this way of being or connecting to this energy for yourself, I hope you'll consider reading my book, which will be released later this year. It is called The Divine Within: Healing Ourselves to Heal the World. I explore many ideas about spirituality and psychology and neuroscience and the interconnectivity to this compassionate state, and how I believe this is where all human beings are heading, that I think this is our how we're evolving, is to be more compassionate and less fear-based. And I'll also invite you to consider signing up for my online course, The Divine Within: Healing Ourselves to Heal the World, which I'm currently in the process of creating. It will supplement and have additional exercises and teachings that my book does not have. If you found this video helpful, I hope you'll consider watching past videos or future videos. I hope you'll consider signing up for my newsletter on my website, Blossoming Heart Wellness. I'm sending you so much love and appreciation for the ways that you show up and express yourself and your inner divinity. I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you, no matter what state of consciousness you're in, and I accept you where you are. Even if you currently are engaging in behaviors that cause you or others suffering, I accept you and I love you where you are. But I do hope that at some point on your journey, you find more peace and ease within yourself and you experience less suffering.